Ms. Kowalczyk, please stand up and step away from the payroll terminal.
What's going on? This is payroll processing day.
Sharon Kowalczyk operated without oversight for 12 years as a payroll manager in Rockford, Illinois. 6 people on her payroll never existed. Not one person checked.
We're investigating payroll records tied to employees we can't account for.
There has to be some mistake.
She would not get to finish that sentence. By the time the FBI agents standing in her conference room read the search warrant aloud, they had already frozen 4 bank accounts, copied the payroll server, and printed a single reconciliation report 23 pages long. 6 employees, 0 badge swipes, 0 benefits enrollments. Roughly $1.2 million in direct deposits over 6 years, every one of them paid into an account that traced back to the woman behind the desk. Sharon Kowalczyk had spent 12 years as the only person at Meridian Forge Industries who fully understood how the payroll system worked. That was the problem. Nobody else understood it either. Quick question before we go further. How closely does anyone at your job actually look at the payroll list? Drop a comment and tell me whether you'd notice a name on it that didn't belong. And if you're new here, hit subscribe. We cover the trust betrayal cases that mainstream coverage walks past every single week. Sharon Marie Kowalczyk was born in Rockford, Illinois, in November of 1974, the second daughter of a tool and die machinist named Edward and a school secretary named Patricia. The family lived in a yellow 2-story on Brendanwood Road, 3 blocks from Riverside Park, in the kind of neighborhood where every father on the street worked second shift at one of the city's manufacturing plants. Rockford in the 1970s was still a city that built things. Camcar, Soonstrand, Barber Coleman, Ingersoll. Edward Kowalczyk worked at a small contract shop on 11th Street that supplied parts to most of them. He came home every night with cracked hands and a paycheck stub he handed directly to his wife. That stub was something Sharon noticed early. Her mother filed each one in a green metal box on top of the refrigerator. Sharon watched her balance the household checkbook at the kitchen table every other Friday, the same routine. Tear open the envelope, write down the gross, write down the net, subtract the rent, subtract the utilities, subtract the grocery envelope. Numbers were how the family stayed afloat. Numbers were also how Sharon learned, before she was 12 years old, that money on a piece of paper became real only when someone wrote it down somewhere. She graduated from Boylan Catholic High School in 1993, ranked in the upper third of her class, with handwritten teacher comments in her file describing her as quiet, exceptionally organized, and comfortable with detailed work. She enrolled at Rock Valley College that fall on a partial scholarship, pursuing an associate's degree in business administration with a concentration in accounting. She paid for the rest by working 25 hours a week at a Walgreens on East State Street, ringing up prescriptions and stocking shelves for $6.10 an hour. She kept her receipts in a shoebox. Every Sunday, she balanced her own checkbook the way her mother had done. In 1995, 2 months before her 21st birthday, she answered a classified ad in the Rockford Register-Star for a payroll clerk position at a small fastener manufacturer called Westline Components. The job paid $8.75 an hour. Her duties consisted of data entry, time card verification, and the printing of paper checks every other Thursday. Her supervisor, a woman named Donna Garofalo, wrote in Sharon's first 6-month review that she was meticulous, dependable, willing to stay late, and possessed of an unusual patience for repetitive numerical work. Sharon stayed at Westline for 16 years. She married Gregory Hahn, a heating and cooling technician, in the summer of 1999 at St. Bernadette Parish on North Mulford. They bought a 3-bedroom ranch on Christina Drive for $112,000 and had 2 children, a daughter named Allison in 2001 and a son named Brandon in 2004. The marriage was, by every available account, ordinary. Greg coached his son's Little League team. Sharon ran the concession stand. They took the kids to the Anderson Japanese Gardens on Sunday afternoons and to the Magic Waters Water Park in the summer. Their tax returns from those years show a combined household income that hovered between $78,000 and $94,000. They were not wealthy. They were not in any kind of obvious distress. In the fall of 2011, Westline Components was acquired by a larger competitor, and most of the back-office staff was let go. Sharon's severance covered 4 months. She spent 6 weeks of that time scrolling through Indeed and Monster and the Rockford Chamber of Commerce job board, sending out resumes, sitting for interviews in borrowed blouses. The position she finally landed was at a mid-size precision castings firm on the west side of the city. The company was called Meridian Forge Industries. 214 employees across 3 buildings off Latham Road. They were looking for a senior payroll specialist. The salary was $48,000. She started in January of 2012. Her first performance review at Meridian Forge, written in July of that year by the controller, called her a remarkably fast learner who has already streamlined 3 internal processes. Her second review described her as indispensable. By the spring of 2013, she had been promoted to payroll manager. By the fall of 2014, the controller who had hired her had retired, and Sharon had been quietly granted full administrator privileges on the payroll system. Nobody else at the company knew how to operate it. She was 40 years old. She had a husband, 2 kids in middle school, a mortgage with 12 years remaining, a 2009 Honda Pilot in the driveway, and complete unsupervised control of every dollar that moved through her employer's accounts-payable system. She had also, around that time, started keeping a separate notebook in the bottom left drawer of her desk. Nothing was written in it yet. Meridian Forge Industries was, on paper, exactly the kind of company that should never have been vulnerable to internal fraud. It had been founded in 1958 by a German immigrant machinist named Klaus Mehring. By the time Sharon Kowalczyk was hired in 2012, the company had grown to 214 employees, 3 production buildings, a corporate office on Latham Road, and an outside auditor who came in every March to certify the financials. They had a chief financial officer. They had a controller. They had a human resources director. They had an ISO 9001 certification that required documented internal processes for every department. What they did not have was a real check on the payroll department. The system worked like this. Every other Monday morning, Sharon Kowalczyk pulled time clock data from the shop floor's badge readers and merged it with salaried employee records. She calculated gross pay, withheld taxes, calculated benefits deductions, and produced a payroll register. That register listed every employee being paid that cycle, the amount each was receiving, and the bank account into which the deposit would be routed. She emailed a 1-page summary to the controller. The summary showed only totals: total gross, total tax, total net, total to bank. The controller signed off on the totals. The wire transfer went out Wednesday morning. Direct deposits hit employee accounts Friday at 5 a.m. Nobody else at Meridian Forge could see the underlying register. Not the controller, not the CFO, not the HR director. The payroll software, a customized version of an older system called DataTech Plus, had been installed in 2006 by a vendor that no longer existed. The login that allowed administrative access to add or remove employees, change pay rates, and modify direct deposit information sat on Sharon's machine and nowhere else. The IT department did not have the credentials. The CFO did not have the credentials. The outside auditor reviewed the company's financial statements every March, but did not, in any of the 11 audits performed during Sharon's tenure, perform a headcount-to-payroll reconciliation. A headcount-to-payroll reconciliation is the most basic anti-fraud check that exists in corporate finance. You pull every name from the payroll system. You pull every active employee from human resources. You compare the 2 lists. The names should match exactly. Every paycheck should correspond to a real human being who badges into a building, enrolls in benefits, and shows up on someone's organizational chart. In 12 years at Meridian Forge, no one ran that reconciliation. Not once. The HR director maintained her own employee roster in a separate spreadsheet on a separate server. She used it for benefits enrollment, for performance reviews, for the company directory. She had never compared her roster against the payroll register because she had no reason to believe the two would not match. The CFO who hired Sharon had told the HR director on her first day that Sharon Kowalczyk was the most organized person in the building. The HR director took him at his word. Trust in a payroll department is structural. Every company in America runs on the same assumption. The person who manages the payroll list is the person who controls the payroll list. The list is the record. The record is the truth. If a name is on the list, that name is being paid for a reason. The reason exists somewhere, in someone's filing cabinet, in some other system, signed off by some other manager. The reason does not have to exist. It only has to be assumed to exist. That was the gap. That was the vulnerability. And by the summer of 2017, Sharon Kowalczyk had been studying it every other Monday morning for 5.5 years. The first ghost employee was created on the morning of August 14th, 2017, a Monday, during the busiest hiring season Meridian Forge had ever recorded. The company had landed a defense subcontract that spring and was onboarding 17 new shop floor workers across 2 weeks. Sharon Kowalczyk processed all 17 new hires that morning. At 10:47 a.m., according to system logs later recovered by federal investigators, she created an 18th. His name was Marcus T. Wheeler. His listed position was production associate, building 2, second shift. His social security number was a real number that had been issued in 1981 to a man in Mississippi who had died in a car accident in 2003. His date of hire was August 14th, 2017. His starting pay rate was $23.50 an hour. His direct deposit account was a checking account at a credit union in Belvidere, Illinois, opened the previous month in the name of Marcus T. Wheeler, with a forged Illinois driver's license and a utility bill in the same name. The address on the utility bill was a P.O. box at a mail services storefront in Loves Park. Sharon had opened the account herself. Marcus T. Wheeler's first paycheck for 40 hours of work he had not performed was deposited into the credit union account on August 25, 2017. Net pay was $712.16. Sharon withdrew $600 in cash from the credit union the following Saturday and deposited $550 of it into her family's joint savings account at Alpine Bank, where she explained to her husband that she had picked up extra freelance bookkeeping work for a friend who owned a small business. That was the model. That was the entire scheme. The second ghost, a woman named Diane M. Pruitt, was created on March 19, 2018, during a smaller hiring wave in Building 3. Pruitt was listed as a quality inspector, day shift, a role that paid $26.10 an hour. Her direct deposit went to a savings account at a small bank in Cherry Valley, opened with a different forged identity. Pruitt's pay was withdrawn the same way Wheeler's had been, in small increments every other week, never enough to trigger a federal currency transaction report. By the end of 2019, there were 4 ghosts on the payroll. By the end of 2021, there were 6: Howard Lynn, Brian Costa, Janet Hollis, Stephen Marquez. Each was placed in a department with low headcount turnover and a manager who oversaw the shop floor rather than the personnel list. Each was assigned a real-sounding hire date that coincided with a real hiring season. Each was given a pay rate that fell within the legitimate range for the role. None were enrolled in benefits because enrollment required forms signed by the Human Resources Director. None were given badges because badges required visits to the security office. None appeared on any organizational chart because organizational charts were maintained by the HR department, not by Sharon. The ghosts existed in exactly one place: the payroll register. And the payroll register was the document that Sharon Kowalczyk controlled. She kept careful records of her own. The notebook in the bottom left drawer of her desk eventually filled with a coded ledger, written in pencil, of every ghost employee's pay rate, every cash withdrawal, and every transfer she made into the family savings account. She referred to each ghost by a single letter: W for Wheeler, P for Pruitt, L for Lynn, C for Costa, H for Hollis, M for Marquez. The notebook ran 58 pages by the time she stopped writing in it. The most disciplined part of the operation was its restraint. Sharon Kowalczyk never gave any ghost employee a raise above what a real employee in that role would have received. She never created a seventh ghost, even when the company hired 40 new workers in 2020. She never inflated overtime. She never paid a bonus. She never adjusted withholding to reduce her tax exposure. Every ghost paid federal income tax. Every ghost paid into Social Security. Every ghost received an annual W-2, which Sharon mailed to the P.O. box and shredded the same day. The total flow of money into accounts she controlled, year by year, was modest enough to disappear into the noise of a family running a household. About $9,000 in 2017, $86,000 in 2018, $138,000 in 2019, $221,000 in 2020, $268,000 in 2021, $295,000 in 2022, $213,000 in 2023, about $1.2 million, spread across 6 identities, across 6 years, across a payroll system that processed roughly $74 million in legitimate compensation during that same period. She used the money the way someone in her position would. She paid off the family's mortgage in 2021, 10 years early. She paid cash for a new 2022 Toyota Highlander. She covered her daughter's tuition at the University of Illinois without taking out a single loan. She put a new roof on the house, a new HVAC system, a new kitchen with quartz countertops. She told her husband she had inherited the money from an aunt in Ohio. There was no aunt in Ohio. Greg Hahn never asked to see a will. For 6 years, no one at Meridian Forge Industries asked who Marcus Wheeler was. No one in HR. No one in operations. No one in finance. The shop floor managers assumed Wheeler worked another shift. The other shift managers assumed Wheeler worked another building. The other building managers assumed Wheeler worked in a department they did not oversee. Each manager carried in his head the dozen or so people he personally supervised. The other 200 names on the company roster were someone else's responsibility. Sharon Kowalczyk understood that human assumption better than anyone in the building. She had been counting on it since 1995. In November of 2023, Klaus Maring's grandson, a third-generation owner named Anthony Maring, hired a new chief financial officer. The previous CFO had been with the company for 26 years. He had taken a retirement package in October. The new hire, Daniel Rasmussen, was 41 years old, a CPA with an MBA from Kellogg, and had spent the previous decade as a finance director at a publicly traded industrial parts distributor in suburban Chicago. He started at Meridian Forge on November 6, 2023. Daniel Rasmussen had 3 priorities for his first 90 days. He listed them in his notebook on the flight home from his interview. First, meet every department head. Second, review every existing contract over $100,000. Third, run a headcount-to-payroll reconciliation. The third item was not optional. It was a standard practice at every company he had ever worked at. It was the kind of routine internal control that any CPA performed as a matter of professional habit. He did not run it because he suspected anything. He ran it because not running it would have struck him as negligent. On the morning of December 4th, 2023, he asked the HR director to email him the active employee roster. She sent him a spreadsheet with 231 names. He asked Sharon Kowalczyk to send him the most recent payroll register. She sent him a PDF with 237 names. The numbers should have matched. They did not match. Daniel Rasmussen did what any reasonable CFO would do. He printed both lists, laid them side by side on the corner of his desk, and went down them name by name. He found 6 names on the payroll register that did not appear on the HR roster: Marcus Wheeler, Diane Pruitt, Howard Lynn, Brian Costa, Janet Hollis, Stephen Marquez. He highlighted each one with a yellow marker and walked the printout down the hallway to Sharon Kowalczyk's office at 3:14 p.m. on a Wednesday afternoon. She had been expecting this conversation for 6 years. She had rehearsed it in her car on the drive home almost every night. She had a story ready. The story was that the HR roster was out of date, that those 6 employees had been hired through a temporary staffing arrangement, that the badges had not yet been issued because of a backlog in the security office, that the benefits enrollments were pending because the workers were still in their 90-day probationary period. She told Daniel Rasmussen that story at 3:16 p.m. He listened without interrupting. He told her he understood, that it sounded like a documentation issue, and that he would just need to see the staffing agency invoices and the corresponding contracts so he could close out his reconciliation. She told him she would have everything for him by Friday. She did not have anything to give him. There were no staffing agency invoices. There were no contracts. The agency she had named in her explanation did not exist. By 5:30 p.m., Daniel Rasmussen had searched the Illinois Secretary of State Business Database, the Illinois Department of Employment Security Registry, and the federal IRS Form 941 records for the company. He found nothing. By 6:15 p.m., he had called the company's outside counsel from the parking lot of his condo on West Magnolia Street. By 8:40 p.m., the law firm had retained a forensic accounting firm in Chicago and notified the FBI's Rockford resident agency that a possible internal payroll fraud was under preliminary review. Sharon Kowalczyk drove home that night the same way she always did. She made dinner: pork chops, applesauce, green beans. She watched the local news with her husband. She told him about a renovation she was thinking about for the master bathroom. She slept 4 hours. The next morning, on December 5th, 2023, she did not call in sick. She did not flee. She did not delete files from the payroll server. She drove to work, parked in her usual spot, walked into her office, and began, calmly and methodically, attempting to fabricate the documentation that would back up the story she had told the previous afternoon. She invented an LLC. She generated invoices with a Word template. She made up addresses. She made up phone numbers. She printed 6 fake invoices on the office printer. She did not know that Daniel Rasmussen had already been told by the company's outside counsel not to ask her for the documents. We're about to walk through how the FBI built this case. Before we do, if you're still here, do me a favor and hit the subscribe button. We cover financial crime cases that never made the national news, and the ones with the worst betrayals always have the smallest headlines. The verdict in this one is worth waiting for. The forensic accounting firm in Chicago was a boutique outfit called Halverson Brennan Forensic Group, run by a former IRS criminal investigation agent named Karen Voss. She drove to Rockford on the morning of December 7th, 2023, with 2 junior analysts and a chain of custody binder. Anthony Mehring met her in the lobby. He had told no one in the building, including the HR director and including Sharon Kowalczyk, what was happening. Voss spent the morning interviewing Daniel Rasmussen. She spent the afternoon, after Sharon Kowalczyk had left for the day, imaging the payroll server. The forensic image gave investigators a complete log of every system event over the previous 12 years. Every login, every employee record creation, every pay rate change, every direct deposit modification. The DataTech Plus system had been quietly logging this data the entire time into a backup directory that Sharon had not been aware existed. The vendor that installed it in 2006 had built the audit trail by default. Nobody had ever turned it off because nobody at Meridian Forge had ever known it was on. The forensic team isolated the creation events for Marcus Wheeler, Diane Pruitt, Howard Lynn, Brian Costa, Janet Hollis, and Stephen Marquez. Each event was time-stamped, IP-stamped, and associated with the administrative user account belonging to Sharon Kowalczyk. The IP address resolved to the workstation at her desk. Each direct deposit modification associated with each ghost employee was, similarly, tied to her account, her workstation, and her badge swipe into the building that morning. The FBI's case agent, Special Agent Patrick Donnelly of the Rockford Resident Agency, opened a formal file on December 11th, 2023. By December 18th, he had subpoenaed banking records from the credit union in Belvedere, the bank in Cherry Valley, and 2 other regional institutions where Sharon had opened accounts under the ghost identities. The records showed a consistent pattern. Direct deposits arrived from Meridian Forge Industries on the first and third Friday of every month. Withdrawals, in cash, in amounts ranging from $400 to $1,800, occurred at varying ATMs and teller windows across northern Illinois. Never in the same location twice in a row, never above the $9,000 federal reporting threshold. By January 9, 2024, the FBI had subpoenaed Sharon's personal banking records, her husband's, the family's joint accounts, the mortgage payoff records, the title transfer for the 2022 Toyota Highlander, and the credit card statements for both adults in the household. The financial picture was unambiguous. Sharon Kowalczyk's income from Meridian Forge had averaged $86,000 a year over the previous decade. The family's documented expenditures, including the mortgage payoff, the renovations, and the tuition payments, exceeded $1 million more than the combined documented household income. The smoking gun was the reconciliation itself. 6 employees, 0 badge swipes, 0 benefits enrollments, 0 W-4 forms signed in person, 0 entries in the HR director's roster, 0 records anywhere in the company except for the payroll register, the direct deposit instructions, and the W-2 forms mailed to a P.O. box at a Loves Park Mail Services storefront. Karen Voss's forensic team also recovered the notebook. They did not, technically, recover it from the desk. Sharon had taken it home over the weekend of December 9th and 10th, after Daniel Rasmussen's reconciliation conversation, intending to destroy it. She had not destroyed it. She had placed it on the top shelf of her bedroom closet, behind a stack of folded sweaters, and forgotten about it because she had not yet decided what to do. The notebook was recovered on the morning of February 13th, 2024, when the FBI executed a federal search warrant on her residence at 6:14 a.m. She answered the door in the same pale blue robe she had worn on every December morning for the last 6 years. She had been preparing for this moment for so long that in the actual moment, she did not even cry. The arrest happened later the same morning, at 11:42 a.m., in her office at Meridian Forge. Special Agent Patrick Donnelly and Special Agent Marisol Rincon, accompanied by 2 Rockford Police Department officers in support, entered the building through the front lobby. They had asked Anthony Mehring and Daniel Rasmussen to clear the 3rd floor of the corporate office for the half hour preceding the arrest. The HR director had been told that the FBI needed a private conference room. She had not been told why. Sharon Kowalczyk was at her desk, processing the bi-weekly payroll that was scheduled to run that Friday. She had her 10-key calculator in her hand. The agents knocked on the open frame of her cubicle entrance. She looked up. Special Agent Donnelly, Mrs. Kowalczyk, I'm Special Agent Donnelly with the FBI. This is Special Agent Rincon. We have a federal arrest warrant for you. I need you to set down what's in your hands and stand up slowly, please. Sharon Kowalczyk. I have a payroll running on Friday. Special Agent Donnelly. Ma'am, I need you to set down the calculator. Sharon Kowalczyk. 231 people are getting paid on Friday. If I don't finish this register, none of them are going to get paid. Special Agent Rincon. Mrs. Kowalczyk, someone else will run the payroll. We need you to stand up. She set the calculator down on the desk. She stood up. Her hands were shaking. She did not reach for her purse or her phone. She did not say another word about the payroll. She did not ask why she was being arrested. The agents read her rights. They asked her if she understood. She said she did. Special Agent Donnelly asked her if she was willing to answer questions without an attorney present. She said she was. Special Agent Donnelly. Mrs. Kowalczyk, do you know why we're here? Sharon Kowalczyk. I think I have an idea. Special Agent Donnelly. Why don't you tell me what you think we're here about? Sharon Kowalczyk. The payroll register. The names that don't match the HR list. Daniel asked me about them in December. Special Agent Donnelly. And what did you tell him in December? Sharon Kowalczyk. I told him a story. Special Agent Donnelly. Was the story true? Sharon Kowalczyk. No. The story was not true. Special Agent Donnelly, can you tell me what the truth is? She looked at the calculator on her desk. She looked at the corkboard above her cubicle. She looked at the crayon drawing her daughter had made when she was 7 years old, taped to the corkboard for 15 years, faded almost to white from the fluorescent lights. Sharon Kowalczyk. Marcus Wheeler isn't real. Neither are the others. I made them. I made all of them. She was walked out of the building at 11:58 a.m., uncuffed by the two agents, through a corporate office that had been told to stay at their desks. Daniel Rasmussen stood at the door of his office as she passed. He did not say anything. Neither did she. The federal grand jury for the Northern District of Illinois returned an indictment on March 6, 2024. The charges were wire fraud under 18 U.S.C. Section 1343, embezzlement under 18 U.S.C. Section 656, and aggravated identity theft under 18 U.S.C. Section 1028. A. The wire fraud count carried a maximum of 20 years. The aggravated identity theft count carried a mandatory consecutive sentence of 2 years on top of any other sentence imposed. Sharon Kowalczyk's attorney was a Rockford criminal defense lawyer named Gregory Neiman, recommended to her family by a neighbor whose son had needed representation in an unrelated matter the previous year. Neiman was 63 years old, had been practicing since 1986, and had handled a handful of federal white-collar cases over his career. He met with Sharon for the first time on the afternoon of February 13th, the day of her arrest, in a Winnebago County detention room. He told her that there was no defense available to her on the facts. He told her that her best path was full cooperation, full acceptance of responsibility, and a guilty plea. She agreed at that first meeting. She did not waver. The plea agreement was negotiated over 4 months with Assistant U.S. Attorney Michelle Hartwell of the Northern District. Hartwell was a 15-year veteran of the office, specialized in financial crimes, and known among defense attorneys in the district for being unsentimental about restitution. The agreement required Sharon to plead guilty to 1 count of wire fraud and 1 count of aggravated identity theft. It required her to forfeit the family's mortgage payoff funds, the 2022 Toyota Highlander, and approximately $390,000 in remaining household assets. It required full restitution of $1,233,155 to Meridian Forge Industries, payable over the remainder of her natural life. It capped the government's sentencing recommendation at the low end of the federal sentencing guidelines. She entered the plea on July 18, 2024, in front of the Honorable Robert L. Caldwell at the federal courthouse on West Adams Street in Rockford. The hearing lasted 41 minutes. She answered every question yes or no. She did not look at her husband, who sat behind her in the second row of the gallery. The sentencing hearing was held on October 22, 2024. Anthony Mehring read a victim impact statement on behalf of Meridian Forge Industries. He was 61 years old, the grandson of the founder, and had been in the company in some capacity for 38 years. He spoke for 9 minutes. He talked about his grandfather, who had immigrated from Hamburg in 1949 with $70 in his pocket. He talked about the trust that built a company over 3 generations. He talked about the controller who had hired Sharon, who had retired in October of 2023, having no idea what had happened on his watch. He said the controller had taken the news harder than anyone, that he had aged 10 years in 6 months. Anthony Mehring, my grandfather used to say that the books are a kind of promise, that the names on the payroll are a promise the company makes to the families behind those names. Sharon Kowalczyk made up names for 6 years. She put fake families on our promise. She used the name of a dead man from Mississippi. She used the same payroll system my grandfather built this company on. And the worst part, Your Honor, the part I cannot get out of my head, is that she ate at the company picnic every August. She brought a casserole. She sat at a table with the people whose work she was hiding behind. She is the most patient thief I have ever heard of. She made co-workers up out of thin air, and she sat next to real ones for 12 years, and not one of us ever looked twice. Judge Caldwell then addressed Sharon directly. Judge Caldwell: Mrs. Kowalczyk, I have read the presentence report. I have read the victim impact statement. I have read the letters submitted on your behalf by your husband, your daughter, your son, your pastor, and 3 of your neighbors. I do not doubt that you are loved. I do not doubt that you have been, in every other domain of your life, a person of decency and care. That is what makes this case so difficult to sentence. You are not a violent person. You are not a person who acted on impulse. You stole, every other Friday, for 6 years, the wages of co-workers you invented. You sat down at a desk and you wrote a name, and you wrote a social security number, and you assigned that ghost a pay rate that you then collected for yourself. You did this not because you needed to. Your husband works. Your salary was sufficient. You did this because you could. Because you had built a position over many years of legitimate hard work in which nobody could see what you were doing. That is the precise definition of a breach of trust. The sentence I am about to impose reflects the seriousness of the offense, the duration of the deception, the dollar amount of the loss, and the impact on the company and its workforce. It also reflects your cooperation, your acceptance of responsibility, and your willingness to forfeit nearly every dollar your family had in order to begin repaying what you took. He sentenced her to 57 months in federal prison, 33 months on the wire fraud count, 24 months consecutive on the aggravated identity theft count, 3 years of supervised release upon completion, restitution of $1,233,155, payable at a minimum rate of $200 per month for the remainder of her life, or until paid in full. She was permitted to self-surrender on January 14, 2025. She self-surrendered on time at FPC Greenville, a minimum security federal prison camp for women in Greenville, Illinois, 280 miles south of Rockford. The facility houses approximately 300 women, most of them serving sentences for white-collar offenses, drug conspiracies, or immigration violations. Her projected release date, accounting for good time credit, is February of 2029. She will be 54 years old when she walks out. Greg Hahn was not charged with any offense. The federal investigation found no evidence that he had known the source of the money. He continues to live in the house on Christina Drive. He works the same heating and cooling job he has worked for 26 years. Their daughter graduated from the University of Illinois in May of 2024 and is enrolled in a master's program in social work. Their son lives at home and attends Rock Valley College. Greg drives to FPC Greenville every other Sunday. The drive is 4 hours and 40 minutes each way. He has not missed a visit. Meridian Forge Industries hired a new payroll manager in April of 2024. The new manager reports to the CFO, who personally reviews every employee added to the payroll register against the HR roster every 2 weeks. The DataTech Plus software was replaced in July of 2024 with a system that requires 2-person sign-off on every employee creation, every pay rate change, and every direct deposit modification. The outside auditor's engagement letter for fiscal year 2024 included, for the first time in the company's 66-year history, an explicit headcount-to-payroll reconciliation as a required procedure. The 6 ghosts in the final accounting paid taxes for a combined 23 years. The IRS has not yet decided what to do about the Social Security contributions made under stolen identities. The dead man in Mississippi, whose Social Security number had been used to create Marcus Wheeler in 2017, had 2 adult children. They were notified in March of 2024. They had never heard of Sharon Kowalczyk. They had never heard of Meridian Forge Industries. They were, like everyone else in the case, surprised that something so ordinary could be stolen for so long without anyone noticing. This story stayed quiet because the money was quiet. But what came next, on the case right here on your screen, is louder, uglier, and somehow even harder to believe. Click it now.